What we've got here is we've got all the folks that spoke in the past 2 days. They're here to answer the questions. We've got General McKay and Desi Winfield as well. Any questions that they can't handle, they're going to defer. Get a specific question to one of the briefers. If you remember their name, you can just simply say, Carl Reagan, this question's for you. And can you please amplify on some of the remarks you made, or Mr. Hart, or something like that. Raise your hand, we'll get a microphone over to you, and I'll call on you, and we'll start right over with Sergeant Dawson.
My question is, has any research analyst interviewed any Hawaiian or Hawaii resident veterans in Hawaii? And would it be possible for JPAC to set up a one-day Korean War veterans interview in Hawaii?
Use them both, and we don't be 5.1, but obviously one. As far as have we gone there, yes, we have. We've interviewed the 5th Regimental Combat Team at their reunion in Hawaii. We've also talked to other veterans there. JPAC's actually brought some former POWs when we were visiting, coordinating cases and stuff, and we talked with them. As far as the JPAC response,
we have a lot of Korean War veterans, as you know, in Hawaii. We've interviewed a number of those individuals. We've also, every year that they have the Korean War POW group come through, we invite them to JPAC. We talk to them about any experiences they had, anybody they know that was lost in the POW camp. So we interview those people as well and bring them to JPAC for a briefing.
Yes, hi. I posed this question yesterday, and you said it would be completely answered today, and it hasn't been addressed. My question now has become slightly two parts because of the delay. One, why hasn't there been more of an address to the Russia connection of transporting of live prisoners of war? And two, regarding my question yesterday, if it's not a viable question, why not? Because do you discount what General Volkanov told us at the Pentagon back in the early 90s that, oh yes, we took your POWs from Korea, we had a shopping list. We loved the pilots, we knew they were educated. He told me that to my face, 18 inches from my face. So if there's a reason why Volkanov should be discounted, I'd like to know why. And if he's not discounted, why don't we show a map of possible gulag sites in Russia, like we showed the camps in North Korea, and the possible routes that maybe the POWs, either through Vladivostok or Manchuria, might have been taken? Because we do have papers on this and testimony. So I'd like you to address that. Thank you.
Rich.
Well, all I can say is for the past 21 years, some of us, a number of us, including me, have investigated the very important issue of the transfer of American prisoners of war or other servicemen to the former Soviet Union. We, as a result of that, we have done, some of you are familiar with the Gulag study, the anecdotes of different witnesses throughout the former Soviet Union, many in the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Baltaristas, and so forth. And despite our 21 years, I think we would say that we have not been able to verify the presence of American prisoners of war in the Soviet Union. As far as the Gulag is concerned, I spent 9 years in Moscow doing what I call the hitchhiker's tour of the Gulag, using the Shifrin book, which many of you are probably familiar with. Went to all of the capitals of the Gulag, looked at card files of the Ministry of Interior, of Internal Affairs, card files there in places like Pochman, Vorkuta, and Magadan. And in short, we're continuing to work, and we certainly will continue to look into any possible lead in terms of the alleged presence of Americans in the former Soviet Union. I would say that I personally would like nothing better after 21 years finding some evidence that could be verified.
Over here. Go ahead, Mark.
This is for Dr. Holland. When you were presenting on the cases, recent cases that you've identified, on the one that was the X-file, y'all had some basic information about the body, even though you weren't able at the time to send over the 50s to identify it, but you knew kind of the general region that it had been found in. Do you have that kind of information for all of the unidentified bodies that are buried in the punch bowl? Or are there some that you just don't know anything about because they came from Korea?
Yeah, we essentially have that for all of the unknowns. They were all looked at by the predecessor of our laboratory, so we have a skeletal inventory, we have a dental inventory, and we have historical records of where they were located. So we know what the scientists thought about them in 1954, 55. Generally, that information is bearing out. Sometimes when we exhume them and reanalyze them, we adjust the stature, adjust the age. But generally, we've got a pretty good idea of what's in there, and that's what forms the basis for our proposal to exhume. Is the information that's generated. But yes, we have that information for everyone.
This is not a follow-up, but it's more to the question that was asked just before the break about the red tape was the term used. We tend to want to use the term of being able to ensure there's some type of oversight. I think what we would all agree is this. All of the work that Dr. Holland and his team does prior to getting it approved will have to be done anyway. Is that fair, Tom?
Yeah.
So the question is, I think most people in America would prefer that that work be done while they are still in the ground, as opposed to them being on the shelf, if you will. So the bottom line is, it's going to take that amount of time anyway. And what we've been working with JPAC on is a streamlined process for JPAC and also OSD, PNR, personal recovery, and personal readiness, just to make sure it's streamlined. So once we get that document, we insist that it takes weeks to quickly turn it and get it back to JPAC so they can do this turn. So I will tell you that the question was, is there anything that we can do to speed up the process from an elected official standpoint? I think it's okay right now. I think we got it about right. We will continue to look for ways to tweak it and make it even more efficient. And that's we owe that to all of our families.
Good afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel John Phillips from Las Vegas. I have 4 quick points. First, I'd like to thank you for bringing this back to the metropolitan area. We were really upset about being out there at Tyson's Corner. Secondly, this is one of the best I've been to. I've been at a number of them. I'd like to thank the staff and the general for putting together an outstanding organization. Let's give them a big hand. The third point is we always like to go on a tour. We didn't do that this time. So maybe if you include a tour of some significant point here in town, we appreciate it. And lastly, I mentioned a couple of meetings ago that I lost my father in the Korean War. Like most of you have lost a loved one, and some of you may not know that you can have a funeral service at Arlington, which I did 2 years ago, even though my father, Major John J. Phillips, is missing. We never found the body. But I contacted my local funeral home in Las Vegas, which is the way to go. And they made the arrangements so that my the body. We had a funeral service with the whole 9 yards, and I'm going to go up there tomorrow and visit the special reserve area at Arlington for those where we don't have the body, but they have a tombstone, you can have a case on, the whole 9 yards, and you just have to work through your local mortuary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To expand on what the Lieutenant Colonel said, you do have the option to have a memorial service. We do it quite frequently in the Navy because of what we refer to as deep water losses. An airplane goes down, it's 2 or 3 miles under the ocean, and the likelihood of recovering those individuals is next to 0. So if you are interested in that memorial service, what you can do is actually contact your casualty service representative and start talking to them about the process. But a memorial service basically looks the same as a funeral. It's all the honor detail, it's the grave, it's the headstone. It's almost exactly like a full funeral.
By the way, Gary and Bob, I'm not sure where Bob is, just had their memorial this morning, and it was very powerful. And I have photos, if you'd like to see it. I would like to follow up with Gary's question, because I think that the point he raised has 2 parts to it. Jim addressed the one part. Have we been able to find any hard evidence on these men that were taken, either kept behind in North Korea or transferred to the Soviet Union? The first part is all of the evidence that they were. And there is, I have a file that thick of declassified documents, letters, correspondence back at the time, whether it would be the 1952 CIA document that details how hundreds of men that details how they were taken. Whether or not they were, we don't know, but you cannot look at that document and say it was made up. I have a letter from the Secretary of Army in 1953 that details how Eisenhower wanted to know about the missing men, how the missing men that were taken from camps, 610 Army, they just weren't in the camps after that big switch. 300 Air Force weren't in the camps. They don't know where they went. It indicated they were going after technicians. There are many people here who may not know this, and they deserve to know this. But yet, it's not anywhere up here. None of these documents are up here. None of this is presented. What's presented is what you haven't found. What's not presented is what may be there. Why isn't that facet of this mission, which could entail many, we don't know, that's the problem, but everyone has a right to see the evidence, and unless they're into it as much as some of us are, they don't know. They just don't know what's out there. And I would think it's up to you people to present it, whether you believe it's true or not. We have a right to see it. They have a right to see it. And so my question is, why isn't that a featured part of your presentations?
Someone in this crowd handed me the mic to answer this, so I will. We at one time did have a separate session that represented the U.S.-Russia Joint Commission, a whole separate session on that related to the research that was being done to try and track these individuals down. What I can tell you from what we do, as part of my presentation on trying to figure out who all the POWs were, we looked at end-to-end, A to Z, for the POWs to find out, this took a period of years, to find out what we knew about who was lost in what location. And what we found was, for the POW population, which was around 2,000 of the 8,000 at that time missing, was they had a solid death date sometime while they're in the camp system. There was maybe 100 individuals who did not have a solid death date, which indicates people saw them die in the prison camp system. And a lot of those names were individuals who were, we think, shot by the Chinese or in terrible shape and could no longer keep up with the route marches. That's what most of the other ones are. So if you don't have the POW populations for thousands of people to have been sent to Russia, then where do you go? Then you look at the MIA populations. Well, in the MIA populations, we found from looking at these big battles that occurred in North Korea, was that there were hundreds of men. For example, there were 244 individuals who were listed as missing in action in the 31st Regimental Combat Team Task Force Faith. And the veterans told us those guys were killed by the Chinese because they were wounded guys on trucks, and the Chinese threw grenades on the trucks and killed them all. We know one guy who survived all of that. They're all listed as missing in action, but we have a great number of population there that we know in fact are killed in action. Same as the Battle of Coonery. Kate Chan was mentioned a little bit before. The Army estimated there was 400 dead in the run of the gauntlet. Most of those are classified as missing in action. Well, the morning report clerk was not reported on this guy who died, but there's a lot of Army deaths along that gauntlet route. Same as the Battle of Unsan, over 100 known dead there. Most of the people are classified as missing in action. Then where does that take you? That takes you to some selected error cases that are very worth following up, because we do know the Russians wanted to make a sixth. They wanted to know about technology. They interviewed our guys about capabilities of the B-29s and so on. So that's very enticing to figure out what did they do with some of these Air Force folks potentially to get them. But that still does not add up to thousands of individuals who could have been sent on these transit routes. So if we put up transit routes, we can say this is a reported transit route, or this is a reported gulag. Well, the gulags, that's well known, and I think we could probably have a poster of the gulag system or the GUP system. Well, what we do know is this, to try and figure out who could have been the people on all these transit routes if we don't have a large POW or MIA population for those people who have been sent on these transit routes. So we're like, who else is out there who this could have been? Well, we know there was around 70,000 Russians in the 64th Fighter Aviation Corps. They rotated into the theater. We don't think they flew all of them, so they probably took the Trans-Siberian Railway also. And as explained earlier in the meeting, we got out of East German records plans and executed missions of the sponsoring East German agencies that got over, say, 860 some East German or German-speaking defectors of the French Foreign Legion during the Korean War who defected to the Viet Minh side, and then were put on the same transit routes that were reported here, where they switched trains at Manchu-Li, switched from the Chinese gauge to the Russian gauge at Manchu-Li, and this did happen during the Korean War. So there you have an explanation of, if they're not our guys, who are these Caucasians being sent? And some of them also being black has been reported. And who is it that's doing the reporting? Well, the guy doing the reporting is not a CIA case officer, it's someone he's being paid as an agent, or someone is said to be in the press. We're not sure we can verify specifically that information, and there is a lot of reporting of people in camps and so on. So who are these people in these camps? Well, we do know that Americans were in the Gulag system. Auto workers from the 30s, people were convicted of being spies, businessmen, and so on. There were kidnappings by the Russians in the Cold War era, and these guys would be returned a couple of years later. You had that situation, you had the John Noble, the Charles Noble situation, and other Americans named in the Gulag system. Our problem is trying to figure out who are the Korean War guys? Who are the Korean War guys who could have gone in the populations that we're talking about if we don't have a good population of folks who could have been sent to the Gulag from the Korean War? That's the problem we have. And I'll tell you, and another thing is you have war era reporting, CIA and so on, but then at the end of the war, where's all the reporting? It should continue. We should have continued through the 50s and 60s and so on. We haven't seen that reporting in the archives, so we're wondering if they gave up on the source, or maybe we don't know what that was. To be sure, this is still an open question for the JCSD guys to track down. That's absolutely true.
Well, I got to follow this. Just give me a moment. Okay. My point is that you can say all that. That's fine. I'm not saying, say all that, but show
Hey, Rick, if I can, there's a list of various reasons. 2 years ago, we did have those briefings. One of the requests was to have a separate breakout for the Cold War families. No, Rick, we did, and we took the folks, like Jim Canal, we took them out of the room. We can add that back in, and we'll add that next year. It's very simple for us to do. We can put that briefing back in. Well, it will talk about the transfer issue, and that's what you want to focus on.
Oh, you got the sightings of North Korea and Vietnam pilots.
We can add those, we can put those in the briefing. It's very easy for me to do. I just have to ask the Dazzy, and I'm sure he'll agree, but it was something we decided to try to address the Cold War issue, was to have a separate breakout for it, which was simply a manpower. It's not nefarious. In the back.
My question is, my father's name appeared in the press in the local community as a prisoner of war. Subsequently, it was recanted that he was a prisoner, removed, and I can't say I wasn't even born, or I was an infant. But the question I have is, I was told that I should contact the Red Cross in Geneva, but my suspicion is, or I should say suspicion, my guess is that this would have been sent through the Department of War, or I don't know what you call it back before. But wouldn't it not have been an official communique that would have been issued to the press? And which department would it have gone through, and how do I track that down? Thank you.
There were numerous attempts to figure out who was missing in the war, who the Chinese might have held, and so on. And some of those efforts at giving names over were done through Geneva and through Warsaw, because these were the routes that the Chinese were paying attention to us. That does exist. We found some of that in the National Archives and some of that in the Library of Congress. I think we'll have to get with you separately on your case to specifically address your specific case, though. Grab one of us after the meeting and we'll try to track that down and figure that out.
Any other questions?
We got one up here. Two up here.
You get mixed up down there?
I was to say that I am very grateful for every one of you. You have touched my heart. Thank you so very, very much. Now my challenge to you guys, and I'm glad to see every one of you here, it's wonderful what you've done to make your efforts to come. But there's a lot of you that are not here. A lot of people that came last year, they're not here now. My challenge to you is come back next year. And the year after that, we have a little lady back here. Clara, you're not there right now, are you? She has been coming every single year. I've seen her every year since I've been coming in the 90s. Every year she's here. She stayed by herself. She comes from California. And yesterday, after the meetings, she was told her husband was identified. That's huge. But it can only happen because of what we are going to do. We don't come, they don't have these meetings. This is important to me. It has to be important to you. They're not going to show up for just a few. So make this effort to come back. And don't go home. I would challenge you, don't go home and sit on your hands. Contact your newspapers, contact your television stations, tell them what you've been, what you've learned. And, you know, it's not easy the first 2 times. There's Clara right there. And she's 95 years old. Yes. How many of you are going to continue to come until you're 95 years old? I see a lot of youth that have been coming year after year after year. And, you know, I remember when Ben had brown hair. And Johnny had more hair. And he'll still love me. But, you know, it's going to be up to us. The main difference is what we are going to do when we go home. And contact your congressman whenever you get home. That's very important because you vote. Or you better. Some of you don't. Because this issue, I know, is very important to these people. This has been their life. They have dedicated themselves to this effort. And I'm dedicated. I've been starting this since I was 7. And I'll soon be 68. I started writing because my mother couldn't see and she told me what to say. But then be concerned about what's going on. Not concerned for the other people in this room and their families and their closure. We are family. Let's act like we are united and supporting our people up here. It's very important. They care about us as well as our departed, and we care about them. If you don't get on board with this, because it's very, very important. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. In 1965, an Army sergeant who was stationed in South Korea defected, became a deserter, he defected to North Korea. Almost 40 years later, in 2004, for various reasons, he returned to be under U.S. control. And my question is, was there any intel derived from his debriefing pertaining to the Korean War POW-MIA issue?
Right, he gave the North Koreans a slip in Indonesia. He got back to his family in Japan in 2004. But he reported himself into Camp Zama for a trial because he was going to be put on trial. And there was a bank of interrogations that were done to find out what he knew. We participated in that. And he told us he did not see anybody except for the other Army deserters who escaped out of Korea from 62 to 65. He did see other Caucasians in Pyongyang from time to time. But if you, as was mentioned earlier, if you happen to travel to Pyongyang as a tourist, there are Caucasians all over everywhere. Because there are there's NGOs, there's nuclear inspectors, there's the European Business Association over there, people who do shipping, there's 2 Italian law firms there because of the Italian car company and Nambo and so on. So you see Caucasians all over the place. It did not surprise us that they saw Caucasians who we didn't know. But he didn't say they were, say, old Korean War era kind of guys.
So you had no information pertaining to possible grave sites?
He mentioned something about a grave site that didn't relate to U.S. It was other people, like rock soldiers who were buried, as I recall. Nothing important, nothing that would help us in resolving any of our cases.
Here.
I was in Korea, and the war was between China and the U.S. And so many Chinese were killed; they were just slaughtered as they attacked. They had so many casualties. I really appreciate what we're trying to do about getting our casualties back, our people back. Can any of you comment, what are the Chinese doing anything about all their losses?
Part of our archival research, as Dan mentioned, our meetings with the Chinese. I worked North Korea for about 20 years, not in North Korea. I'm very familiar with our South Korean allies, and when you go to meetings, it's always good to have trading material. So I went through the archives looking for information about Chinese soldiers. I found about 30 files that contained, maybe a stack this high, that contained descriptions of the deaths of Chinese prisoners or men who were captured, wounded on the battlefield, and subsequently died. And being the good people we were, we actually gave a forensic description of the guy's cause of death, etc. We had a chaplain sign off on these things, and I'm not sure if we gave them back to the Chinese at the time, but I went ahead and scanned all those and put them on a CD for them back in, I think, 09 or 10, no later than 10, and gave it to them for training material. And the director of the archives said, "Thank you. We have questions every now and then about our losses, and this may help us answer the questions." But other than that, they have not asked us to do any other work in our national archives.
Let me just add to that. As we were really trying to push to get some movement on missing from North Korea, in the late 80s, we actually went into South Korea and intentionally recovered the remains of some Chinese as well as North Koreans to offer them back. They really were not interested, and tried it a couple of times. Second time they said, no, we don't want to take them back, and so they wound up being reburied in South Korea. So we intentionally went and recovered some of their soldiers to offer them back.
Hi, John Zimmerly again. In the year 2000, the Joint Commission Soviet Directive, I believe, I'm not exactly sure the name there, JCSD, our allies, we had a commission with the Soviets doing some research, and this report was published. It's multi-pages, and it went on and on about sightings in Russia of Americans. One of them listed Foster, Hatch, Leon, Miller, Davis, Hubert Johnson, Morin, Larson, Boyer, Fisher, Halfland, and Kaiser. This was a story about a cleaning lady in a glass bottle, I think. Are you now saying that none of these reports, none of these sightings in this report were valid?
I recall that report vaguely. Bill O'Brien actually worked on it. He tracked all those names down. He didn't find a compelling reason why any specific name would be legitimate from that list. And as I recall, that was a hearsay type recollection, not a direct eyewitness type recollection. Nevertheless, it was of interest, and that did.
It said in the report, Foster could be First Lieutenant Robert Foster, Sergeant Elmer Foster. Hatch, it said Robert Hatch is missing. Under Leon, it was Chan J. Park Kim, which was George Leon. He cited Hubert Johnson was probably Herbert Johnson. I mean, this actually identified guys that they related these names to.
For example, Kim J. Chan, George Leone, 9 American returnees from the POW camps said he died in the Apex camps in North Korea. I would trust these American heroes. I would trust their word before the hearsay memoir from a Russian archive.
And I understand that, but this was a Joint Commission report. It was circulated to the families that identified names that could be possibilities. If this is not valid work, then we shouldn't be publishing it. Thank you.
Well, any name should be looked at.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to follow up on what the lady in red said earlier about staying involved. I live in Los Angeles. There's a national cemetery there near UCLA. It's 88,000 veterans are buried there. And every Memorial Day, they give a really nice honoring celebration for Memorial Day. I tried for 6 years to get 2 minutes to mention the missing at the service. I grew up 2 blocks from the cemetery, my dad did too. This year, they finally let me do it. At first, they said, the missing have their own day. Why don't you read it that day? And I said to the panel, Rick was with me, I believe, what day is that? And none of them quoted. And I said, my point exactly. So I was allowed to read my speech about the missing at Memorial Day at the VA cemetery. John Boyd was the MC, and after I finished, I had anyone in the audience stand up who had a missing loved one and said, you need special recognition today. And John Boyd just about lost it. He hugged me and said, man, you knocked it out of the park. And after 6 years, the director of the cemetery said, are you coming back next year? So what I want all of you to do to follow up with what she said, you just keep pushing. If you got a local TV spot that needs to fill 2 minutes, you get your butt in there. If there's somebody on the radio that says, hey, anybody got anything to say today? It's Open Mic Friday. You talk about this. Talk about it intelligently, because most of the people in this country don't know a rat's about this. And we need to educate them before we get much older, and it would help put pressure, not just on these guys, but on just answering the questions, if the whole country would rise up and understand what we've been going through.
Okay, before I turn it over to questions.
I tried not to sing, but I have to. My father was missing in the Korean War. I was 4 months old. My mother's deceased now. I didn't know about this meeting, this program. We could complain, but I want to say on behalf of those who are here today, thank you. And to encourage you to continue to work to bring closure to those of us that are here. I can remember as a child growing up, not having my father there, and kids teasing me, saying my father had gone to the Korean War, and he didn't want to come back. I knew that wasn't true, but it hurt. And my mother passed probably 10 years ago, and we never had this conversation. So I'm here to say thank you, and I'd like to have closure for my son. I have one son, I have a grandson, and I have a granddaughter. That we could have some place that we could go to and say, this really did happen. My father was a part of the Korean War. He gave his life for this country. And I'd like to have some place to go to commemorate that. So again, thank you, and I really appreciate you.
Will there ever be a meeting in New Orleans, Louisiana?
If you want to meet in New Orleans, you got to put that survey. You got to convince about 400 people to put on that survey, the same thing. If you put it on the survey,
radius that is.
we would love to go to New Orleans. I would. We would all like to go to New Orleans. I just want to put a plug in for the survey. The survey is very key. A lot of things that you saw, we shortened the day, we had a breakout for the Cold War, we're going to fix that. We flipped the schedule. We used to have Tom Hollins do the brief right off the bat, and then folks were kind of trying to put the pieces together, so we thought we'd start from the beginning and work to the end. The breakout time for the families, the service casualty officer briefing, we take your points and you put it on that survey, we're gonna include it. So if you've got strong feelings, you want to go somewhere, we went to St. Louis a few years ago, because a bunch of people said, let's go to St. Louis. Nobody liked that. So we came back to Washington, but put those things on there, because we read every one, the Dazzy reads every one of those doggone surveys, and you know, if you don't like some of the briefers, you know, just put your name down, and my name's Rocky Carter. But before I turn it over to the Dazzy, there's just a couple people I want to recognize that weren't in this room the whole time. Your service casualty officers, a lot what's going on here is the briefing, but running around upstairs, doing your one-on-ones, or your service casualty officers, they're the ones really that are doing a lot of work. They don't always get the recognition in these big rooms. So I think that just make sure you thank your service casualty officer on your way out and talk to them. They are your key points of contact. And the three other folks that volunteered their time, we actually have Staff Sergeant Pablo Plato in the corner here, and Miss Mary Gonzalez, and Sergeant First Class Jose Cabillos. They were translators that volunteered their time to come in and help out some of the folks from 65th Infantry Regiment. We appreciate you taking your time and coming out and helping us out. And it was really nice of you guys. Can't thank you enough. That's all I have, sir.
You all have been great troopers. And there has been a lot of talk about the relationship between DPMO and JPAC and the news and the media and so forth. But I will tell you, that's history. Now, they were really talking about our predecessors, I suspect. But I want to tell you that Major McKay and I became fast friends before we even got into these positions. And that was very positive. We trust each other. He has my back, and I have his. And the reason that's important is because if we're working together in unison, we can do a lot more. And that's where we're headed, and that's been extremely effective for us. And with that, I will turn the mic over to him for final words before I close it out.
I would echo Daphne Winfield's comments. This community has been fractured for many years, and it took individuals, leaders, to recognize that fact and to move beyond it, because why we do what we do should be the all-encompassing reason we exist. I can assure you that JPAC and I are privileged to be part of this annual meeting. I can assure you JPAC and I are privileged to be a part and a partner of the accounting community. And more importantly, I can assure you that JPAC and I are committed to serve you and what is important to you. I told you yesterday I'm a proud son of a Korean War veteran and a Vietnam veteran. I can say that with pride, but I can also say that I cannot fathom the void that you feel. My father did return. And I want to do everything humanly possible to make sure that you too can say that. JPAC has taken had a lot of extra attention in the last month, both from the media, from the Department of Defense, and from our Congress. It all hasn't been positive. It's besmirched the people that work for me. And I told you yesterday that in 32 years in the Air Force, I had never been associated with a more talented, more dedicated group of individuals than the 503 professionals that work for JPAC. I can tell you that despite the attention of the last month, I am not only encouraged, but I am emboldened by why we exist, why it is the mission that we have is laid at our doorstep, but I'm also emboldened by the fact that it's the right thing to do. There is no question in my mind why we exist. as an organization. Could we be more efficient? Absolutely, and we're working on that. Could we be more effective? Without a doubt, and we're working on it. But I can assure you that we have your interests at heart. We are committed. We are passionate. I told Senator McCaskill and Senator Hyatt last week at our hearing that there is no doubt in my mind why we are passionate about what we're charged to do. Despite the facial shots, the public criticism, I and my team are emboldened by what it is we're charged to do. God bless you all. It was very encouraging for me to meet you. Thank you for coming up to me, sharing your stories. God bless you all.
We want to improve every year. And I had a motto when I was in uniform way back when, and it was getting better and better every day. But we want to get better and better every time we do this. So another plug for the survey. Rick, thanks for your recommendation for bringing it back. There was another recommendation, I do need to address this right now, about giving a little more lead time before we say this is going to happen. We're going to work at that. That's a little bit challenging for us because we will never know that far in advance whether we're going to have money or not. That's just the nature of the fiscal environment we're in. But know this, I would take a look at your surveys to see, because most of you come up to me and said, if you have to give us a short suspense, we'll take the event anyway, as opposed to not putting it on the books at all. If that's what I find in surveys, there will definitely be one next year, but I can't guarantee the very long lead time. But we know that this is important. And just think about all the people that came here for the first time. Absolutely superb. Now, Mrs. LeMay is one of my favorite ladies here. She stole my thunder, but that's okay. But let me share it anyway, because I have a little more information on one of our heroes here. PFC Jonathan Posey. This is a different one. Let me talk about it first. You asked it first, and that was Sergeant First Class Joseph E. Gant. He was also a World War II veteran, and that was pretty neat. He was a part of Sea Battery, 503rd FA, the 2nd AD. I believe it was an all African-American artillery unit at that particular time. Well, he was captured at Coterie, and he was a POW, and he was a POW at POW Camp 5. He came back to us